It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast, your local daily real estate podcast, as we talk property from Rockhampton to Adelaide, and of course everything in between, and streaming right now on multiple platforms, including iHeartRadio and Apple Podcasts. Well, the weekend, it is back. Yahoo! Time to relax. Well, for some of us. For others, if we've had a busy week, it's about to get even busier if we are chasing property around Australia. Saturday, September the 6th today, and a shout out to first home buyers heading into the spring, potentially facing one of the toughest property seasons for a while, with investors surging back into the market and driving up prices on the most affordable properties. It's probably quite inevitable that is likely to happen. And Domain, they reported in some states nearly 4 in 10 new home loans are going to investors, forcing first home buyers into direct competition for entry-level homes. You know, we've got the rate cuts while improving borrowing capacity. That is happening in tandem. Also, we've got the pushing of property values going higher. And buying a home, of course, it is one of the biggest decisions most people will ever make. Yet for first-time buyers, it's often one of the most confusing. You know, the industry is full of jargon with sales methods that can do your mind in. There's traps that can easily catch buyers off guard. Just trying to understand the sales strategies and practices that trip up buyers can be a nightmare to work through. So this morning we're going to step over some of that as we catch up with Paul ORiordan. He is the principal of ORiordan Real Estate in the Blue Mountains. And got to come back to that comment, you know, about these investors that are getting in there. They're starting to leverage themselves. Yes, the market is changing, Paul, but, you know, you don't want to get into that situation where the dominoes effect through one thing happening and the causation of that, we're in trouble.
Good morning, Craig. Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we've just come through a rate rise extravaganza where a lot of people kind of hit the wall. And now that money is cheap, it seems like people haven't remembered that and they're jumping straight back in. Caution is my recommendation. Regardless of where the price ends up on money, you got to think it through.
And if you think that that's probably an overreaction, all you got to do, if you haven't watched the movie The Big Short, go and watch it, because it's all about the GFC. It's a classic in terms of the way they break that down. That is a point in case in terms of you don't want to over-leverage yourself.
Absolutely. Yes, that is a cautionary tale of mammoth proportion, isn't it? The way that everything kind of just crumbled and fell apart and took everybody by surprise there. Not saying anything like that is near, but caution.
Yeah, if you're an investor and you've seen that movie, go back and rewatch it and then sort of apply it to what you might be doing right now with leverage. Well, one of the first things to talk about this morning when it comes to potential confusion for first-home buyers is expressions of interest. It is referred to as EOI. What is that for people who don't know, and why is it used instead of auctions or private treaty?
Yeah, look, EOI is probably one of the rarest methods that's used, where instead of negotiating back and forth like in a private treaty, buyers are asked to put their written offer in by a set deadline. And once that deadline passes, the seller looks at all the offers and decides which one they'd like to accept. So when you make an EOI, usually you'll be asked to submit your offer along with a full deposit. Now, that deposit isn't locked in, however, and it's fully refundable right up until the moment the contracts are signed and exchanged. Prior to exchange, either side can walk away without penalty. So paying the deposit, it's a little old-fashioned. It's just a way of showing that you're serious about buying. Sellers often choose the EOI over private treaty or auction if they want to create urgency, test the market, dislike the other methods, or if the property is unique and harder to price. So a vendor can gauge market expectation from the offers submitted without committing to a price guide. Then they can decide if they wish to sell it or not.
Yeah, a lot of people just get really confused. I think there needs to be some sort of confidence too within yourself when you're buying a property. You are the person that is in charge of what you're going to offer. So don't be intimidated with that EOI. And once the offer is accepted in a private treaty sale, perhaps let's just step over what happens next.
Yeah, look, this is a question I'm getting a lot, especially from first home buyers. So there's a few moving parts in the process. The first step after your offer is accepted is what's called the exchange of contracts. Now, that simply means that both the buyer and the seller sign an identical contract, and then the agent or conveyancer dates the contract. Once that's done, the sale is then legally binding. Now, there were two types of exchange, and this gets people confused a little bit. So there's a conditional exchange and an unconditional exchange. So with the conditional exchange, which is usually handled by the agent, you'll have a cooling off period of either 5 or 10 business days. So to get started, the buyer provides their full details, including middle names, current address, and their conveyancer details, and then pays a 0.25% deposit of the purchase price into the agent's trust account. The contracts are then signed and dated, and the cooling off period begins from the next business day. Now, it is important to understand that during the cooling off period, the contract isn't final and amendments can still be made. The seller, however, is locked in and they can't sell the property to anybody else. But if the buyer has the right to walk away for any reason during the cool off period, but if they do, they will lose their 0.25% deposit. So it's kind of like an insurance policy for the buyer's point of view, taking the property off the market. So if the buyer then decides to proceed with the sale, they pay the remainder of the 10% deposit at the end of the cool off, and then the contract becomes unconditional. So the unconditional exchange, on the other hand, just skips the cooling off process entirely. So this is done by conveyancers. The contract is final in its final form, and the 10% deposit is paid prior to signing. The buyer contract is then signed, sent along with a form called a 66W to the vendor's conveyancer for exchange. And look, the 66W is just a letter from the buyer's conveyancer that waives their cool-off rights. If the buyer pulls out after this point and after the contract is dated, they would then forfeit their entire 10% deposit. So a conditional exchange is preferred by buyers as it gives them a little breathing space, where most vendors, and agents for that matter, prefer an unconditional exchange as it locks everything in straight away.
Yeah, no, that is great advice. We're also going to cover this morning, what do you do when you don't have the price guide? How frustrating is that? And there is this, I guess you can call it a dirty word, underquoting. Some will disagree with that, but we'll talk all about that after this.
Every morning from 6 a.m, we bring you the latest real estate news with diverse perspectives from leading industry experts. We deliver the most property podcasts across Australia every week.
I don't think people really think about the outcome that they're trying to achieve, or the outcome is just, I want to get my face out there, and they think that that's going to help their brand. And sometimes it does, but sometimes it does so much damage. I wish people would really think through the decisions before they actually post.
I should say that comedy, when it comes to real estate, that is such a fine line to walk. You've really sort of got to be on or off there. Most of the time it bombs. But your friends are not going to say, hey, what you're doing is a little bit naff on your social media channels. You know, people won't say it to anybody, so they're really not getting the feedback that they need.
So true. And it's also, word feedback is also really interesting. Instead of asking for feedback after say I give a presentation, I don't ask for feedback afterwards. I say, can you give me some advice on how you think I could improve that for next time? And when people are asked for advice, they're much more willing to actually share what you might do next time rather than what you didn't do very well this time.
From the emotion of property, the economic inflation, managing your expectations, lack of stock, price growth, construction appetite, days on the market. Stay informed with us and know your property.
And it is a Real Estate Saturday. Good luck if you are heading out looking at property right across this weekend. You might come across something where homes appear without a price guide. How confusing is this? And you can be buying your second, third or fourth property and be completely frustrated because there is no price guide. Paul is back with us. And Paul, what does that signal for buyers when they look at a property without a price guide?
Look, I understand it can be frustrating, and no price guide can make you feel like you're flying blind. But there are a few reasons why this happens. So sometimes it's strategic. So the seller wants to test the market and see what buyers are prepared to pay without putting a ceiling on the price. Other times it's because the property is unique or the recent comparable sales have such a wide spread that it's hard to see where the price fits in. Now, no price guide doesn't mean the seller has no idea of value. The vendor and the agent will almost always have an expectation in mind, and they're just holding back from publishing it. By doing this, they're hoping to attract a wider pool of buyers and then refine and publish the guide once they've gauged the level of interest, usually after an open home or two. For buyers, the best way to deal with no price guide is to ask the agent for comparable sales and then do your own research. That way you can form a realistic price range for yourself and avoid wasting time on properties that might not fit your budget.
Yeah, the funny thing about the no price guide is most people will do their due diligence with that comparable price guide that you're talking about. Then you can say, right, this is where I'm at. This is the dollar amount. Suddenly the agent can say, oh no, that's not within the price guide. And go, well, hang on, you didn't have a price guide. You can't have it both ways. Another big issue being talked about at the moment a lot in the real estate industry, and there is a very big real estate case at the moment to do with underquoting. As I mentioned, this can be a dirty word. It's a nightmare when you waste money down a rabbit hole thinking that the price is one figure, only to learn, it's something entirely different, isn't it? I've wasted all of this money. How sad. So how can buyers protect themselves against the costly trap of this dirty word, underquoting?
It's the scourge of real estate, really, and there's some operators out there that do it on a consistent basis. But look, generally, to protect buyers, if it looks too good to be true, there are a few smart questions you can ask the agent before spending any money on any reports or solicitors. So these questions, or the ones I recommend you ask the agent, are: what are the vendor's expectation on price? Will the vendor accept an offer at the top of the guide? And which comparable sales were used to set that guide, and can you provide them? The agent should be able to document and prove why they have set the guide where it is. Beyond that, again, there's no substitute for your own research. Look closely at recent sales in the same area and at other homes currently on the market in direct competition. That way you'll know what a realistic price is and what isn't. It's also very important to, as you mentioned earlier, Craig, underquoting is illegal in New South Wales. If you genuinely believe it's happening, you can lodge a complaint with the Department of Fair Trading. And agents caught underquoting face significant penalties, and the best way to stamp it out is to hold people accountable so their behaviour changes.
Well, there's one individual, of course, who has lost his trading licence. I think that is still in place at the moment. So, yeah, the big takeaway there, if you're a real estate agent, particularly in New South Wales, do not do it. Well, plenty to think about there, Paul. Enjoy your weekend. How's that temperature into spring now going for you?
It's warming up. The smell is in the air. This morning is a beautiful morning, and looking forward to the opens and meeting some people out on the streets and in the homes. So, yeah, can't be more excited for a Saturday.
Explore new property destinations where you could live with exclusive interviews covering real estate news and market insights.
You moved to Australia 12 years ago for a better life. Now you are heading next year with your family to Dubai. And also good morning to Michelle. We got your email. You say that you are headed over to the UAE in November to start looking for a townhouse. You say that you've got no idea where to start, what areas to look at, although you have got a few that you are favouring, which I'll get to in just a moment. So let's go to you, Mario, because as I say, milk and honey, it seems to be Dubai.
Well, you know, Craig, I'm always a big fan of Dubai, and clearly I'm happy to hear that listeners are also thinking the same way. But, you know, Australia has always been a bit of a lure to me. My wife's been, she says it's amazing, but it's good to hear the banter coming from one listener to another saying, come over here, don't come over here. So I would say, please keep these messages coming. It's quite amusing to actually hear this.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.